day and night. I toss and turn, I keep stressing my mind.
What is going on, guys? Victor here with a brand new video, and yes, this is the day after UFC 249, and yes, I can say that it was a complete and utter success. Everything went well. The fights were amazing from top to bottom, from the first fight in the early prelims all the way to the last fight on that main card. The fights were fire. There was action left, right, up, down, diagonal, sideways. It doesn't even matter. The fights were amazing, and I'm just going to go into it and talk about the main event between Justin Gaethje and Tony Ferguson. Now, it was definitely a fight of the year contender. There was a lot of action in that fight. Tony ended up getting knocked out in the 5th round by Justin Gaethje. Now, this was a stoppage on the feet by Herb Dean. I'm just going to go over a little bit of the fight before I do talk about the stoppage at the very end, but just throughout the whole entire fight, Justin Gaethje had a really good game plan going on, and Trevor Whitman, being one of the best MMA minds in the whole entire sport that he is, just cooked up the perfect game plan for Justin Gaethje. And Tony Ferguson, what can you say? He has one of the best chins in the whole entire sport. If that chin isn't made out of iron, I really don't know what it is made out of. But just Gaethje, man. Gaethje was he was starching Tony with his leg kicks. He was starching Tony with his hooks. He was starching Tony just everywhere. Every single time he got into a close proximity, he ended up starching Tony with either a hook or an uppercut. He had a couple of good combos in there as well, but basically these were just there were 2 or 3 punches just leading up to one another. And the thing was, Tony was eating all these. Tony was eating these leg kicks. He didn't decide to check any of them, and he didn't utilize his head movement either when it came to the fight. Another problem that Tony had was that when he lost those first 2 rounds, he didn't utilize his wrestling. He didn't utilize his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It was a complete and utter shock to me, and probably you guys as well. When we talk about Tony, we talk about one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artists that we have here in the sport of mixed martial arts. He's one of the most creative minds that the sport has to offer. He's one of the most unique and unorthodox guys that you can really fight, just because of trying to figure him out. Trying to figure him out is like trying to figure out a maze. It's really hard. You're obviously going to have your troubles. You're going to run into a couple of roadblocks, and you may never come out of that maze. That's what happens when you face Tony, but Justin Gaethje was able to get through that hump and work up just a masterpiece. He was piecing Tony up, and whenever they got close to each other, chopping those legs, and everything worked. Everything. Tony, he was eating shots that guys could have been knocked out from. Gaethje, most of these shots had knocked out Barbosa. It had knocked out it knocked out James Vick. It also knocked out Michael Johnson. It knocked out Cowboy Cerrone. And Tony was just eating these shots like it was no tomorrow. He was eating them. He wasn't phased until the later rounds of the fight. Now, I know a lot of people are probably out there saying that, why did Tony have to cut weight for his fight that was canceled against Khabib? Was it a huge factor coming in the next week, knowing that he would have to lose all that weight all over again for a second consecutive week? When we talk about fighters, we don't usually talk about them going down in weight 2 weeks in a row, trying to make that weight. So it all depends on how much weight that Tony gained after doing that weight cut for the canceled Khabib fight. But at the end of the day, Tony had his wrestling and his BJJ that he could have utilized. And if he would have utilized that, it would have became more of an interesting fight, just because Gaethje is a former Division I All-American wrestler. So if they would have actually engaged in that wrestling, we would have learned something brand new about Gaethje, his level of wrestling, his level of experience of wrestling, and how he could be able to utilize it in an actual fight in martial arts, just because we haven't been able to see it so far in his UFC career. No, he might have been able to he probably did utilize it, or he might have utilized it during his career with the World Series of Fighting, now the PFL, but I haven't watched any of those fights. I only started watching him when he came into the UFC. I didn't know about him, but if you didn't know about him, now you know, just because of that performance that he had and he has a serious amount of power in those hands, and definitely in those legs as well. And he's known for chopping guys down with those leg kicks. He did it with Poirier. He did it with um, Eddie Alvarez as well in those two fights. And he also did a little bit against Barbosa before he knocked him out. He's always dependent on the leg kicks. He's always dependent on his power and his hooks as well. And a couple interesting things as well is that Trevor Whitman gave him some really good advice, telling him to knock down 10% of his punches because he was trying to kill the guy. Trevor didn't want him throwing so many heavy blows to Tony just because he didn't want him to get tired. Another thing that Whitman told Gaethje was that I don't want you to get real comfortable because it's cost you a couple of times in the past. And Gaethje even told him right after that, it cost me twice, not once, but twice. And those were the fights against Eddie Alvarez and Dustin Poirier. If he would have won those fights, then he probably would have already faced Khabib by now for the title. But as we stand here, Justin Gaethje is the new lightweight interim champion of the UFC. His next date is most likely going to be against Khabib. Khabib is currently in Ramadan. Ramadan starts in April and ends in May. So after this month is over, Khabib is going to be back at it. He's going to be back in AKA with Javier Mendez, with Daniel Cormier, his cousin Islam, and all those other guys ready to get back at it, chomping at the bits. Especially now that we're back running these shows now. If you guys don't know, there are going to be 2 other shows this coming week, one on Wednesday and another one this coming Saturday. So UFC is going to keep on running these events and trying to get back to their normal schedule. But as of right now, that's what it looks like for the near future. I don't know how fast Gaethje can be able to come back, especially from a 5-round war such as that one that he had yesterday with Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson, for me, should probably take the rest of the year off just because he's been having so many fights. He was on the 12-fight win streak that got snapped by Gaethje. If I were him, I would just wait to see who wins Gaethje versus Khabib, just because I do believe he deserves a title shot even after those 2 fights. Just because of all those guys that he's been facing in that murderous row in the lightweight division, he's just been taking guys out left and right, and he put these opportunities right in front of him, and he took these risks that came with it. Did he have to fight Justin Gaethje? No, not at all. The guy literally could have waited for Khabib, and they could have had a title fight later on during the summer if he wanted to wait. But Tony's just, yeah, he's a gamer. The guy decides what he wants, when he wants to do it, and what he wanted was a fight against Justin Gaethje because he wanted to put on one of the baddest fights you could probably see. When I mean bad, I mean good, and just a badass fight. That's what he really wanted to put on, and that's what both men displayed yesterday. And both of them definitely have durable chins, and both of them have durable bodies as well. And those guys put each other through torture yesterday, and I was just happy. I was just honored just to see the fight, to see the UFC come back after 2 months. And I'm glad to say that the UFC is officially back. We're back in action, and Dana White's a genius. Donald Trump even chipped in to help out to try to make this possible. The Florida Athletic Commission made it possible. The governor of Florida, the mayor of Jacksonville, Florida, were all able to make this happen. And it's not stopping anytime soon. The ball is just rolling, and we're ready to keep on going with all these shows. So, I appreciate you guys for watching this video, and hope I gave my best kind of post-fight analysis through what I watched, just because I only watched the fight once. I know a lot of people are going to be watching the fight more than once, maybe 2 or 3 more times, just to see what happened to Tony. Why wasn't El Cocoy there? A lot of people talk about Cowboy. When Cowboy loses, he loses as Donald, but when he wins as Cowboy, just because of his showings. Sometimes Cowboy's coming out there firing on all cylinders, and then other times he just doesn't show up. And I don't want to say that Tony didn't show up because Tony didn't lose without a fight. No, he put up the best fight that he can possibly put on, and he was willing to die inside of that octagon. You could see it on his face. His face was bruised up, cut up. His legs were battered. His body was battered. Tony physically he was beaten, he's battered, but you couldn't kill his spirit. The man was willing to die inside that octagon, and Justin Gaethje was willing to die inside that octagon as well. But other than that, I'll probably make another video on this very soon. I'm gonna make a couple more videos and some of the other fights that were on that main card and on this history-making card as well. UFC definitely made history. I definitely believe that they broke the pay-per-view record just because every other sport in the world is shut down, and every other sport here in the United States is also shut down as well. Nothing is going on. The UFC was the first major sport, a major promotion, the comeback, so all eyes was on the UFC. All these famous people, all these famous athletes were pitched in, they were watching, they bought the pay-per-view, they were into it. And not only them, but a lot of people that weren't MMA fans as well. So all in all, I just want to say, thank you guys. Thank you UFC. Thank you Dana White for putting on one of the best, if not the best card that the UFC has ever put on in the history of the promotion, in the history of the sport. So I'll keep on popping these videos up, and I'll see you guys later.